They thought they could take her land because she was quiet, because she was alone, because she was black. A corporate developer named Trent Carter saw Maggie Ellison as just another aging farmer in rural Georgia, an easy target in a long line of silent victims. He and his men came with fake smiles and forged documents, assuming she'd fold like so many others. But when they picked Maggie Ellison, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know Maggie was a retired Delta Force commander with decades of tactical training and a heart full of quiet fire. What came next wasn't just resistance, it was a reckoning, one that would pull an entire town out of silence and into unity. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one woman, it's about all of us. Sunlight drifted over her fields that morning, soft on the rows of okra and sweet corn. But beneath that calm, a storm was gathering, and Maggie was already preparing. Maggie Ellison had the kind of hands that told stories without words, rough, strong, browned by sun and stained by soil. When she pressed her palms into the earth of her family's farm in Stillwater, Georgia, it was like greeting an old friend. She hadn't been back in nearly 2 decades. Not since she'd left for the kind of life people whispered about: military deployments, silent medals, and rooms with no windows. Now, at 61, she had returned. Not as a hero, not even as a veteran, just as a woman with calloused fingers and a quiet heart, ready to trade war zones for watering cans. The land had changed little. The barn still leaned slightly to the east, and the oak tree by the well still wore the tire swing her brother had tied up in '73. But Maggie had changed. Her stride was slower, more deliberate. Her eyes scanned the fields not just with care, but with memory. Her soul craved peace, real peace, not the kind found in a folded flag or a quiet retirement, but in rhythm, in morning roosters and rows of green beans. Every morning she walked the property lines with her dog Juno, and in the afternoon she sat on the porch with sweet tea and a quiet hum in her throat, the kind her mama used to sing while folding laundry. The kids in the neighborhood called her Miss Maggie and waved from their bikes. Folks at church welcomed her with pound cakes and curious glances. Still, she didn't share much. How could she explain the places she'd been, the things she'd seen? What would they say if they knew? But perhaps the better question was, what would they do if they ever came for her land? She didn't dwell on it. Not yet. For now, the air was warm and the soil was soft, and sometimes that was enough. But every evening, as the sun dipped behind the pine trees and the wind brushed over the hills, Maggie sat a little straighter. She knew something others had forgotten. Peace is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of readiness. It was a Tuesday when the truck came. Maggie had just finished spreading mulch along the tomato rows when the sound of gravel crunching rose up the hill. The sun was low, painting the field gold, and Juno let out a single low growl, a sound Maggie hadn't heard since her last deployment. The truck didn't belong to anyone local, too polished, too loud. It stopped at the gate without invitation. 3 men got out. The tallest wore a belt buckle the size of a saucer and a smirk that made the air feel colder than it should have. One of them tapped the fence post with the tip of his boot, like he was testing something fragile. "You, Miss Ellison?" the leader asked, arms spread like he owned the world. Maggie didn't nod. She didn't blink. She just set down her gloves and walked forward slowly. "Depends," she said evenly. "Who's asking?" "Name's Trent Carter. We're with Southland Development. Folks round here been talking about progress. You're sitting on a gold mine, ma'am." Her jaw tightened. "I'm sitting on my family's land, not a gold mine." Trent chuckled. "That's cute, but let's be real. You're out here alone, no heirs, no help. We could make this easier, for you, for everyone." A pause. The breeze stilled. Even the birds seemed to listen. Maggie stared at him, then past him toward the oak tree her father once mended with wire after a storm. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move an inch. "It's not for sale," she said. A silence followed. Not empty, charged. Then Trent's smile vanished. "We'll be back," he muttered. And they left, dust swirling behind them. That night, Maggie locked her gate for the first time in years. She sat on the porch, eyes on the dark road below. Juno didn't sleep. Neither did she. What do you do when the threat isn't a storm or a war, but a neighbor in a clean shirt and smooth words? She didn't have an answer, but she knew this: trouble had found her peace, and trouble never came alone. The next morning, Maggie walked her land with a different kind of gaze. Not the calm, calculating eyes of a farmer, but the silent, scanning eyes of a soldier. She noticed every boot print that didn't belong, every bent blade of grass along the fence line. And at the north corner, she saw it. Tire tracks, too fresh, too close. Inside the house, the air felt heavier. She went to the coat closet near the stairs. Behind the wool jackets and gardening aprons was a panel, wooden, painted over. She pried it loose. Behind it lay a metal case wrapped in canvas and dust. She hesitated only a second before lifting it out and setting it on the kitchen table. When she opened it, the past greeted her like an old comrade. A sidearm, sealed and oiled. A folded black vest. A laminated map of Stillwater County with hand-drawn grid lines. And a photo. 12 soldiers, dusty and young, arms slung over shoulders. Maggie in the middle, unsmiling. She stared at it, whispered their names, then shut the case. Somewhere outside, a wind chime clinked once, then stopped. Down the road, the church bell rang noon. But Maggie didn't move. Her hands stayed on the table, fingers resting on the map, tracing the ridge near her property. How do you bury a part of yourself and still walk whole? That question settled in her chest like smoke. She didn't want to need that part of herself again, but need wasn't polite. It didn't ask permission. It came knocking in the middle of peace. That night, she made a list, not of groceries or chores, but names, people she trusted, people she'd defend, people who might be willing to stand. And under it she wrote 3 words in careful, capital letters. No more fear. By Friday, Maggie was no longer alone. It started with a note, folded small and slid into the offering plate at church. Then another, tucked into a sack of sweet potatoes left on her porch. Each one held a name. People who'd been harassed, watched, warned. She remembered what her drill sergeant once told her. Information wins battles before bullets do. So, she moved, quietly but deliberately. That Sunday, under the guise of handing out eggs and homemade preserves, Maggie passed handwritten invitations at the farmer's market. No big talk, just a place, a time. Bring no fear, the note said. That night, 19 chairs filled the old mill barn behind her property. They came with hesitation, some with shaking hands. There was Miss Jean from the diner, still wearing her apron. Mr. Holloway from the church choir. 2 young brothers who worked part-time at the gas station. Maggie stood in front of them with nothing but a flashlight and her voice. "I know you're tired," she began. "Tired of the looks, the pressure, the silence. They want you to feel alone. They want you to feel weak." She let the words settle like dust in the rafters. "But we're not alone. And we're not weak. We just haven't stood together, yet." The barn grew quiet, the kind of quiet that comes right before something changes. From the back, Mr. Holloway spoke. "What do you expect us to do, Maggie? This ain't a war zone." She looked him in the eye. "Neither was my grandmother's front porch when they burned her rose bushes." A murmur moved through the room. People shifted in their chairs. Heads turned. If not now, when? If not us, who? The air thickened with resolve. By the end of the night, every hand in that barn had signed a list. Watch shifts were arranged, supplies gathered, radios ordered. And as they left, one by one, Maggie watched their backs straighten, just a little. Even fear knows when it's outnumbered. They struck at 3:12 a.m. A gunshot cracked the silence, followed by flames rising from the Jenkins pasture just west of Maggie's line. She was already dressed by the time the radio on her windowsill crackled. "Fire at the west fence, no plate on the truck," Caleb's voice reported, steady but urgent. Maggie moved without panic, grabbed her extinguisher, her boots, her resolve. By the time she reached the flames, neighbors were already there, passing buckets, stomping fire, forming a line. No one shouted. No one ran. It was practiced now. United. The fire died quickly. Wet earth and old instincts had seen to that. Standing in the smoke, Maggie looked toward the trees where the attackers had fled. She didn't chase. She didn't need to. She knew what came next wouldn't be with fists or guns. It would be with facts. And those had already been collected. In the weeks before, Maggie and Maria had quietly scanned documents, photographed license plates, even recorded conversations. Maria, with her fruit stand's suspiciously strong Wi-Fi, had uploaded it all to one safe folder, then mailed a copy to the State Department in Montgomery. 2 days after the fire, a plain sedan rolled into Stillwater. A federal investigator stepped out, quiet, clean, watching everything. By week's end, the permits from Southland Development were revoked. The names tied to forged documents exposed. Trent Carter? Gone without a word. Sheriff Brewer? Suspended pending review. No bullets, no blood. It's truth, revealed with patience and precision. Isn't that the hardest fight of all, to hold your ground without giving up your grace? Maggie stood at her porch that night as neighbors gathered, not for battle but for potluck. Kids ran between long tables, an old radio played Sam Cooke. Someone called her a hero. She didn't answer. She just smiled, the kind of smile that says, "We didn't just protect the land, we proved we still belong to it." Spring came early that year. The rains were generous, and the greens in Maggie's fields grew thicker than they had in a decade. Okra stretched high, tomatoes clung heavy to their vines, and her late father's corn plot, replanted by neighborhood kids, rose in clean, proud rows. The fight was over, but something deeper had taken root. On the first Sunday in May, Maggie hosted a potluck under the tall cedar behind her barn. Long tables were draped with checkered cloths. Dishes passed hand to hand, collard greens, cornbread, fried chicken. Laughter floated above the fields like song. Caleb handed her a plate. "You saved this place," he said. Maggie shook her head. "We did." And it was true. Pastor Willis had repainted the church, with help from Miss Jean's grandson. The Jenkins rebuilt their fence with volunteers. Even the old diner got a new sign, carved by the young men who once feared to walk past its door. Stillwater had changed. But more than paint or fences or paperwork, it was how folks greeted one another now, with full eye contact, firm handshakes, and something deeper behind their words: belonging. Maggie sat at the edge of the gathering, under the same cedar her mother used to rest beneath during long summer days. She closed her eyes for a moment. Let the voices blend into memory. Let the breeze remind her of everything they'd survived. How many places in this country still carry old scars beneath blooming fields? The thought caught gently in her chest. She opened her eyes to a little boy waving from the tire swing, one someone had finally fixed. "Miss Maggie's a soldier," he yelled with glee. She didn't correct him. Maybe she always would be. But now, she was something else too, a keeper of peace, a planter of legacy. Because the land had remembered her. And now finally the people did too. At the heart of Maggie Ellison's story is a quiet but powerful truth. Sometimes the strongest form of resistance is simply standing your ground, with dignity, with purpose, and with others beside you. We live in a world that often moves too fast, where power tries to silence the steady voices of experience and memory. But Maggie reminds us that age does not mean weakness, that peace does not mean surrender, and that land, like love, like truth, is worth defending. You don't need medals or uniforms to be brave. Sometimes courage looks like opening your front gate to a neighbor, speaking up when something feels wrong, or choosing to believe that your presence still matters. Because it does. The soil remembers. So do we. Have you ever stood firm for something others overlooked? What did it teach you about yourself? Let Maggie's story remind us, even when the world changes around us, our roots, our values, our memories, our quiet strength can hold us steady. And when we hold each other, we rise. Maggie stood alone at the edge of her field, the morning sun soft against her shoulders, the air filled with the hum of a world still spinning. No applause, no headlines, just the quiet power of having endured and remained. The land hadn't been taken, her voice hadn't been silenced, and the people, once scattered by fear, now stood taller beside her. In the weeks that followed, fences were mended, barns repainted, and long-avoided conversations finally began. The community didn't just rebuild what was burned, they reclaimed what had always been theirs: belonging, dignity, and the right to be seen. No one could erase what happened, but in Stillwater, they made sure it wouldn't be forgotten either. Because remembering is its own kind of justice. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.